My name is Kimberly Reynolds, and I used to believe that love could erase every shadow of doubt a person carried. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a quiet neighborhood where magnolia trees leaned over the sidewalks and the air always smelled like rain before it fell. My parents owned a small bed and breakfast near the coast, and from them, I learned that life could be both simple and beautiful if you worked hard and kept your promises. I carried that belief into adulthood and into marriage. But I never imagined how quickly a promise could be broken, or how expensive trust could become. When I met Michael Turner, he seemed like the kind of man every mother dreams her daughter will find. He was tall, confident, and spoke with the steady tone of someone who'd seen enough of the world to know what mattered. He was from Denver, Colorado, and had come to Charleston on a business trip. We met by accident or fate, depending on how you look at it, at a coffee shop downtown. I had spilled my drink while fumbling through my purse for my phone, and he reached over with a napkin and a smile that could melt an argument. "Let me help," he'd said. It was such a small thing, but his kindness stayed with me. He asked if he could buy me another coffee, and I said yes. That one cup turned into 3 hours of conversation. By the time we said goodbye, he had my number, and I had a feeling I couldn't quite name. The months that followed felt like living inside a dream. Michael called every morning, texted every night, and flew out every other weekend to see me. He'd surprise me with gifts, nothing extravagant at first, just thoughtful things like a silver bracelet engraved with my initials, or a first edition copy of a book I'd mentioned loving as a child. He had a way of making me feel seen, like I was the only person who mattered in a crowded room. My friends called him charming, my mother called him perfect, and I foolishly called him the one. When he proposed, it was on a rainy evening in Savannah, Georgia, under a gazebo strung with fairy lights. He knelt down, holding a diamond ring that sparkled even in the soft drizzle, and said, "Kimberly, I want to take care of you. You'll never have to worry about money again." I laughed through my tears, not realizing those words would come back to haunt me. At that moment, all I could think about was love, not lawyers. Not contracts, not the reality of sharing a life and a bank account with someone who wasn't as selfless as he seemed. The months leading up to our wedding were a blur of planning and excitement. We bought a house together, a white brick colonial with blue shutters on Maplewood Avenue, just outside Charleston. It was the kind of place I'd always dreamed of, a wraparound porch, creaking floorboards, a view of the river at sunset. We spent weekends decorating it, or rather, I did most of the decorating while Michael busied himself with business calls, I noticed. He was often secretive with his phone, but I brushed it off as work stress. After all, he ran a small real estate firm, and clients could be demanding. I wanted to believe in him more than I wanted to question him. Our wedding day arrived on a warm June morning. The church smelled of lilac and old wood, sunlight pouring through stained glass like a blessing. My father walked me down the aisle, and when I saw Michael standing there, tall, confident, smiling, my heart softened all over again. I told myself that whatever small doubts I had didn't matter anymore. We said our vows beneath a golden arch of flowers, and when we kissed, the crowd cheered. For the first time, I thought, this is what happiness feels like. That evening, as the guests left and the last lanterns flickered out, we drove home in silence, exhausted but glowing. Our house was filled with wedding gifts, boxes, ribbons, the scent of new beginnings. Michael poured champagne, handed me a glass, and said, "To forever." I smiled, clinking my glass with his, completely unaware that the forever he had in mind was nothing like mine. I remember leaving my handbag on the kitchen counter that night, still wrapped in the lace handkerchief my mother had given me, for luck. Inside it was my wallet, my cards, and my checkbook, everything that represented years of hard work. I'd saved carefully, investing my inheritance and running a small online home decor business that had finally begun to thrive. It wasn't millions, but it was mine. I had over $200,000 in my account, a safety net I'd built without asking anyone for help. I slept peacefully that night, believing my heart and my money were both safe. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, warm and soft. I reached over to find Michael's side of the bed empty. At first, I thought he'd gone out to grab breakfast. He'd mentioned wanting to surprise me with pancakes. I smiled and went downstairs, humming to myself, but the kitchen was silent. No smell of food, no note on the counter. Only my handbag, slightly open. I frowned, thinking I might have left it that way, but something inside me twisted, a small, uneasy pull. I checked my wallet. My ATM card was gone. I told myself not to panic. Maybe he borrowed it to get groceries or something for the house. Still, my fingers shook as I opened my banking app. When the numbers appeared on the screen, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. The balance read $4,782.36. My heart thudded, so hard I could hear it. The transaction list showed a single, massive withdrawal, $200,000 gone overnight. My hands went cold. My new husband, had cleaned out my account less than 24 hours after we said, "I do." I called him immediately. The phone rang and rang before he finally answered, sounding almost amused. "Hey, beautiful," he said lightly. "You awake?" "Michael," I said, my voice trembling. "Where are you? What did you do with my money?" There was a pause, a long, careful silence, and then he laughed. "Your money? Kimberly, you're my wife. Your wealth is mine too. What's the point of marriage if we're not sharing everything?" My vision blurred. "That's not sharing," I whispered. "That's stealing," he sighed. "Don't make this ugly, Kimberly. You have plenty more." I needed the car. You'll understand when you see it. A car. He'd spent my money on a car. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. Instead, I hung up, the sound of his voice still echoing in my ears. The man I thought was my forever had robbed me before our honeymoon even began. That was the day I learned that love without respect is just a con wrapped in a promise. And as I stood there in my quiet white brick house, the air heavy and still, I realized something else. Forever had already ended. The morning I discovered the betrayal, something inside me broke, but it didn't shatter all at once. It cracked slowly, like glass under pressure, splitting into 100 quiet lines I didn't yet see. The house was silent, sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor, and for a few strange seconds I stood there frozen, phone in hand, trying to understand how love could disappear so quickly. Michael's laughter still echoed in my ears, cruel and calm, like a stranger who had stolen not just my money but the illusion of safety I'd built around him. After that call, I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, clutching the phone as if it could still give me answers. My reflection in the black screen looked foreign, a woman with wide, trembling eyes and lips pressed tight to keep from crying. I had been married less than 24 hours, and I was already a victim of the man who had promised to protect me. The air in the house felt heavy, almost mocking, as if the walls themselves had witnessed the truth before I did. By noon, the shock began to harden into something else, anger. I opened every drawer, every cabinet, searching for clues, anything that could tell me where he went.
His wardrobe was half empty.
The suitcase I'd seen him pack for our mini honeymoon in Miami was gone. The note I expected to find never appeared. There was only silence, the kind that rings in your ears when the world has just tilted off its axis. I called my best friend, Rachel Montgomery, who lived in Atlanta, Georgia. She listened quietly as I told her everything, my voice breaking somewhere between disbelief and rage. "Kimberly," she said finally, "you need to report this. You have that prenuptial agreement, right?" "Yes," I whispered. "We both signed it before the wedding." "Then don't wait," she urged. "Get a lawyer today. Don't even give him a chance to twist the story." Her words snapped me into focus. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't going to be his victim any longer. That afternoon, I drove to Savannah, where my cousin recommended an attorney, Lavra Bishop, a woman known for her calm voice and ruthless precision. Her office sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. When I stepped inside, the cool air smelled faintly of lemon polish and confidence. She greeted me with a handshake firm enough to steady my shaking nerves. "Mrs. Turner?" she asked, raising an eyebrow when I nodded. "For now," I said bitterly. She gestured toward a leather chair. "Tell me everything." I told her, every word. From the missing ATM card to the withdrawal to the call where he laughed about my money. Lavra listened without interrupting, her pen gliding across the yellow legal pad with measured strokes. When I finished, she leaned back and looked at me. "Kimberly," she said, "sometimes justice doesn't come from emotion. It comes from paperwork." I blinked at her, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. She explained that because of the prenuptial agreement, Michael had no legal right to my funds. Not only that, but his misuse of marital trust so soon after the ceremony could strengthen my claim in court. I felt a small, steady spark of hope flicker back to life. We filed the divorce papers that same week. Lavra moved quickly, her confidence cutting through my doubt like sunlight through fog. She sent formal notices, froze what accounts she could, and contacted the dealership where Michael had bought his car. Within days, we confirmed what I already knew. He had purchased a jet black sports car for exactly $198,500, paying in full with my money. For the first time since the wedding, I slept through the night. Not peacefully, but with a kind of grim satisfaction that comes when you start fighting back. Michael didn't respond immediately. He was too sure of himself, too arrogant to believe I'd actually act. When he finally called, it was 3 days later, just past midnight. His number flashed on my phone, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Kimberly," he said, sounding annoyed rather than guilty. "Why are you making a scene? You're embarrassing yourself." I laughed, a sharp sound I didn't recognize. "You embarrassed yourself the moment you stole from me." "You're my wife," he repeated, as if the words were sacred. "That means what's yours is mine. Not anymore," I said quietly. "Not after what you did." He was silent for a moment, then scoffed. "So what, you'll divorce me? Take me to court?" "Yes," I said. "And I'll win." He hung up. The next day, he sent a message saying he wanted to talk things over like adults. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Lavra. She smiled when she read it and said, "That's not remorse, Kimberly. That's panic." I spent the next few weeks piecing my life back together. I closed joint accounts, changed passwords, and began documenting every interaction we had. It felt strange, building a case against someone I once loved, but it was the only way to take back control. Rachel came down from Atlanta one weekend, bringing takeout and laughter, trying to remind me that life existed beyond betrayal. "You're stronger than you think," she told me. "He doesn't get to define the rest of your story." Still, there were nights when the loneliness hit hard. I'd walk through the house, our house, and see his shadow in every room. The half-empty closet, the wine glass he left on the counter, the car keys that no longer jingled on the hook. Sometimes I caught myself wondering whether he had ever loved me at all, or if I'd simply been a target wearing a wedding dress. Those thoughts hurt, but they also hardened me. A month later, Lavra called with news. "The court date is set," she said. "Next Thursday in New York City." "New York?" I asked. "His lawyer filed there," she explained. "It's fine. We'll go to him." When I hung up, I walked out to the porch. The evening air was thick with the smell of jasmine and salt from the nearby river. The sky was turning purple at the edges, and for the first time since my wedding day, I let myself smile, not because I felt happy, but because I knew I wasn't done fighting. The night before we left for New York, I sat at my desk and opened my journal, the same one I'd used to plan my wedding. I crossed out the page where I'd written "Our Future" and replaced it with a new title, "My Future." I didn't know then what the courtroom would bring or how much I'd win back, but I did know this. The woman who woke up in fear that morning was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and far less willing to believe in pretty lies. Love had stolen $200,000 from me, but it had also taught me something priceless, that the dream I thought he stole wasn't gone. It was just waiting for me to take it back. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, New York City greeted me with gray clouds and restless wind. The streets outside the courthouse were loud with traffic, impatient horns, and the steady rhythm of hurried footsteps. I stood at the marble steps of the Manhattan Supreme Court, staring up at the columns that looked far too grand for something as personal as heartbreak. I never imagined that love could end in a place like this, surrounded by lawyers, reporters, and people fighting over money, property, and pride. But there I was, clutching a folder of documents that told the story of my betrayal in cold black ink. My attorney, Lavra Bishop, walked beside me, heels clicking in perfect rhythm against the stone floor. She looked calm, too calm, while I felt like I was standing on the edge of something huge and irreversible. "Take a deep breath, Kimberly," she said softly. "Remember, you're not here to prove you're a victim. You're here to prove you were wronged, and that the law is on your side." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering every transaction record, every text message, every proof of deceit. Still, part of me couldn't believe it had come to this. I had loved that man once, maybe I still did, in some broken, distant way that I refused to admit. But the version of Michael I'd loved didn't exist anymore. When we entered the courtroom, the air changed thick, heavy with the scent of old wood, paper, and something metallic, like tension itself had a smell. The judge, Honorable Rebecca Miles, sat at the front beneath the American flag, her sharp eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. On the left side sat Michael and his lawyer, David Clarkson, both wearing suits that screamed confidence and money. Michael looked up as I entered. For a second, his expression softened, like he wanted to remind me of something, maybe the version of us before the lies. But I didn't look away. I walked straight past him and took my seat. When the hearing began, the clerk read the case details aloud. Kimberly Reynolds Turner versus Michael Turner. The words echoed through the chamber like a final declaration that our marriage, our so-called forever, was now a legal battle. Lavra stood first. Her voice was calm but sharp, the kind that could cut through pretense. Your Honor, she began, my client entered this marriage in good faith, with an agreement clearly defining the separation of individual assets. Within 24 hours of their ceremony, the defendant, Mr. Turner, withdrew $200,000 from Mrs. Turner's private account without authorization and used it for personal purchase, specifically, a luxury vehicle registered solely in his name. She turned toward Michael briefly before continuing. Not only did he violate the terms of their prenuptial agreement, he did so with clear intent and no attempt at restitution. We are seeking immediate dissolution of marriage and full transfer of his personal property to Mrs. Turner under the penalty clause of the signed agreement. Every word landed like a hammer. I could almost hear Michael grinding his teeth. When his lawyer stood, his tone was smooth, rehearsed. Your Honor, Clarkson said, Mr. Turner acknowledges the withdrawal but maintains it was made in good faith, under the understanding that marital assets were to be shared. The funds were not stolen. They were used for a shared future. I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. Instead, I sat perfectly still, fingers clasped tightly in my lap. The judge looked unimpressed. A shared future? She repeated. Mr. Turner, did you purchase the vehicle in your wife's name? Michael hesitated. No, ma'am. But it was for us. Did you seek her permission before withdrawing the funds? No, but then explain to the court, she interrupted, how that constitutes a shared expense. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Michael's lawyer cleared his throat and shuffled papers. Across the table, Lavra handed over the documents, every receipt, every withdrawal slip, even the car registration. Watching the evidence pile up on the judge's desk felt like watching the weight of his choices finally crush him. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled, but my voice came out steady. Your Honor, I began, I believed in my husband. I believed marriage meant partnership, not possession. The money he took wasn't just cash. It was years of work, of saving, of building something for myself. I would have shared it willingly if he had asked, but he didn't ask. He decided that love gave him the right to take. And I can't live in a marriage built on theft. Judge Miles looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening just slightly. Thank you, Mrs. Turner, she said. That was very clear. Then it was Michael's turn.
He stood, straightened his jacket, and looked directly at me.
Kimberly, he said, his voice smooth but strained, I didn't steal from you. You're my wife. Everything I did was for us. That car was meant to be ours. I wanted something we could drive, travel, enjoy. You're making this about money when it was about love. His words might have once swayed me. They might have melted my anger if I didn't know better. But I saw it now, the way he twisted things to make himself the victim, the way he used charm like a weapon. Love doesn't come with a withdrawal slip, I said quietly, but the courtroom heard me. Even the judge's clerk looked up from her notes. When both sides rested, Judge Miles folded her hands and took a moment before speaking. The room was silent, no shuffling, no whispers, just the echo of my heartbeat in my ears. Finally, she said, the evidence is clear, Mr. Turner. You entered into a legal agreement that you violated less than 1 day after your marriage. The court finds in favor of Mrs. Turner, per the terms of the prenuptial contract. All assets held solely in your name are hereby transferred to her ownership. The words hit him like a blow. Michael's face went pale. His jaw tightened. This cannot be happening, he muttered. Judge Miles looked at him evenly. It is happening, Mr. Turner. And perhaps next time. You'll remember that marriage is not a license to steal. When the gavel struck, it sounded like thunder, final, powerful, echoing through the walls and through me. I didn't smile right away. I just sat there, numb, as the courtroom began to stir. Michael turned toward me, anger flashing in his eyes. You ruined me, he hissed. No, I said softly. You did that yourself. Lavra touched my shoulder and whispered, It's over, but it didn't feel over, not yet. It felt like the first breath after drowning, painful but necessary. As I walked out of the courthouse, the wind caught my hair, cold and sharp against my face. The city noise returned, sirens, footsteps, life moving on, and I realized that so could I. I didn't know where I would go yet. Maybe back to Charleston, maybe somewhere new, but I knew this much. I had won back more than property. I had won back myself. And that, I thought as I stepped into the street, was worth far more than the $200,000 he stole. After the court ruling, I didn't feel triumphant, not at first. Winning didn't erase the betrayal or the emptiness that followed. It was strange, really, how quiet victory could sound. No music, no applause, just the echo of the judge's gavel and the knowledge that something once beautiful had been destroyed beyond repair. I walked out of the Manhattan courthouse with a folder full of papers that declared justice was mine, yet I felt like I was carrying the ashes of my own past. Lavra hugged me on the courthouse steps. It's done, she said. You're free. Her voice was calm, professional as always, but there was warmth in it too. You did what most people can't. You stood up for yourself. I smiled faintly. Freedom feels heavier than I thought. That's because it's real, she replied. Give it time. The weight will shift from pain to peace. After everything was finalized, I decided I needed distance, not just from Michael, but from every memory that had his fingerprints on it. I sold our house in Charleston, donated most of the furniture, and kept only a few things that truly felt like mine. My mother's porcelain tea set, my journal, and an old photograph of my parents standing in front of their inn. It was time to start over somewhere new, somewhere the air didn't taste like the past. I moved to Portland, Oregon, a city I'd never visited before but had always admired from afar. It was green and quiet, full of little coffee shops and rain-washed mornings. I bought a small blue house on Evergreen Street, tucked between two tall cedar trees. It wasn't grand like the white brick home Michael and I shared. It was simpler, humbler, but it felt alive in a way that house never did. Every creak of the floorboards sounded honest. Every morning light that filtered through the window felt like a promise I made to myself. I remember the first night I slept there. The house was mostly empty except for a bed, a lamp, and a single chair I'd brought from Charleston. Outside, the rain drummed softly against the roof, and I realized it was the first time in months that I wasn't afraid. No one could take anything from me anymore. My money, my peace, my choices, all mine again. The divorce settlement transferred everything Michael had owned in his name to me, his condo in Miami, his boat, and even that jet black sports car he'd bought with my money. When the court papers arrived confirming the transfer, I stared at them for a long time. It felt surreal. The man who had once looked at me as if I was his possession had lost everything he tried to claim. I didn't want the car or the condo. I sold them both and donated half the money to a women's legal aid foundation in Georgia. I thought of all the women who might be standing where I once stood, betrayed, voiceless, afraid to fight, and I wanted to give them a reason to believe they could win too. A month later, Michael called. It was an unknown number, but I knew it was him the moment I heard that sharp breath before he spoke. You destroyed me, he said quietly. Are you happy now? I stood by my window watching the rain trail down the glass. No, I said. But I'm free, he laughed bitterly. You think freedom will keep you warm at night?
It already does, I replied. He didn't speak again.
The line went dead. That was the last time I ever heard his voice. Life in Portland moved at a gentler pace. I opened a small interior design studio downtown, naming it Everhouse Designs after the street I lived on. It started slow, just a few clients who wanted help decorating their homes, but soon, word spread. People liked the warmth in my style, the balance between comfort and simplicity. They said I had a way of making spaces feel peaceful. I smiled whenever I heard that. They didn't know peace was exactly what I'd been chasing all along. One afternoon, while arranging samples in my studio, a woman walked in tall, elegant, with tired eyes. "I was told you help people start over," she said. I hesitated, then smiled. "I help people make new spaces feel like home," she nodded. That's what I meant. Her name was Evelyn Carter, recently divorced after 20 years of marriage. As I helped her choose paint colors and furniture, she began to talk about her heartbreak, her confusion, her fear. Listening to her was like hearing my own story played back through someone else's voice. When we finished designing her living room, she hugged me and whispered, "You reminded me I still deserve beautiful things." That night I cried, not from sadness, but from something gentler. Healing, maybe? Months passed, and I began to find joy in small, quiet ways. I planted roses in the backyard, painted the kitchen a soft cream, and started taking evening walks by the river. I even adopted a golden retriever named Milo, who followed me everywhere and filled the house with the kind of love that expected nothing in return. Sometimes on sunny weekends I'd drive to the coast, roll down the windows, and breathe in the salty wind, feeling light in a way I hadn't in years. Every so often I thought about Michael, not with anger but with a kind of distant pity. He had everything and lost it all because he couldn't see beyond his own greed. I wondered if he ever stood before a mirror and saw what he'd become. Probably not. Some people never do. But I had changed, profoundly, quietly, beautifully. The woman who once cried over betrayal was now smiling over sunlit mornings and blooming roses. One evening, as the sun began to set, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and lavender, and the air smelled of rain and cedar. I thought back to that final moment in the courtroom, Michael shouting, "This cannot be!" And Judge Miles's calm voice replying, "Yes, Mr. Turner, it can." It still made me smile. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself out." I wasn't sure if I'd ever forgive him completely, but I had forgiven myself for loving too much, trusting too deeply, and believing too blindly. And maybe that was enough. Now, when I look around my blue house on Evergreen Street, I don't see loss anymore. I see resilience, the kind that grows quietly in the cracks of heartbreak and blooms stronger than before. I see a woman who learned that she could lose everything and still rise with grace. I see a future that belongs only to me. And when I smile, it's not out of revenge or pride. It's because I finally understand something simple but powerful. A woman who knows her worth never loses. She just begins again.